Picture a typical Tuesday morning on a high street in northern England. There's no World Cup happening, no royal jubilee, no major holiday. Yet if you look up, the skyline is practically stitched together with red and white. I'm talking about the St. George's Cross. Not just fluttering occasionally in a pub window, but zip-tied to every single lamppost, draped over estate balconies and hanging from rows of terraced houses like permanent wallpaper. At first glance, walking through it, the vibe feels almost festive. You might think, here is a community bursting with harmless pride, or perhaps just a lingering fondness for football rituals. It looks like affection. But as you keep walking, the sheer density of it starts to feel different. It stops looking like a celebration and starts looking like a perimeter. Because flags don't multiply like this by accident. While a lot of that red and white is hung with genuine, simple patriotism, there is a second, far more strategic agenda hiding in plain sight. It's not just about loving the country, it's about visually claiming the pavement. It creates an atmosphere where the flag isn't a symbol of unity, but a subtle, silent boundary marker designed to define exactly who owns the neighborhood, and by exclusion, who doesn't. It makes you wonder, when a national symbol is aggressively plastered on every vertical surface, is it actually an invitation to belong, or is it a do not enter sign for anyone who doesn't fit a very narrow definition of Britishness?
That is the absolute core of it, isn't it? That shift. The moment something that feels like a celebration starts to feel like a perimeter, like you said.
Exactly. It's a really subtle but powerful change in atmosphere.
And that's what we really need to get into today. Because we're seeing how a national symbol can be, well, strategically reappropriated by certain movements to redefine national identity, to assert a kind of cultural dominance.
The speed of it is what's so striking. It feels like this has exploded in just the last few years.
It really has. The velocity is, frankly, astonishing.
So for this deep dive, our mission is to really dissect that tension, to go beyond the simple pride versus prejudice argument and look at the actual strategy. We're going to investigate how the St. George's Cross is being, well, weaponized.
And crucially, look at the other side of that coin, the counter movements, the people and ideas trying to reclaim that same symbol for a modern multicultural Britain.
Right. We've got a lot of material to get through on how this works on the ground, the sociological ideas behind it, and the cultural figures who are really leading that charge to redefine it.
So I think the best place to start is with the movement itself, this so-called Operation Raise the Colors. Let's unpack how it all began.
Okay, let's do it. So this whole thing didn't start in some political headquarters in London. It was much smaller, much more local than that.
Oh, absolutely. Like a lot of these modern political flashpoints, it started in a very specific community with a very almost bizarrely bureaucratic spark.
So where are we talking about, and what was the trigger?
We're talking about the suburbs of Birmingham, places like Weely Castle. And the origin story is just fascinating because it shows how easily a sense of grievance can be, manufactured.
Yeah.
The initial trigger wasn't some ideological showdown. It was a dispute over the local council removing flags from lampposts.
Right, but why were they removing them? It wasn't because they were anti-flag, was it?
Not at all. And that's the crucial detail. The council was trying to install new LED lighting.
You're kidding me. LED lights.
LED lights. It was a simple infrastructure upgrade, a bit of civic bureaucracy. The flags were just, in the way. They were zip-tied on and obstructing the workers. It was a practical problem.
So a completely non-ideological practical issue becomes the spark for a national identity crisis. How does that happen? How does a local dispute in Weely Castle blow up into a nationwide movement so quickly?
Well, it was seized on almost instantly by online provocateurs and campaigners. They knew exactly how to frame it.
And how's that?
The narrative was simple and incredibly powerful. Woke local bureaucrats are denying you your national identity. They just completely ignored the practical reasons.
Because that story is much more compelling. It gives you a clear enemy.
A perfect enemy. It takes this vague, broad feeling that a lot of people have of being ignored, of their culture being under attack, and it gives it a physical manifestation. The flag being taken down.
It's something you can point to and say, see, they're coming for us.
Yeah, precisely. And that narrative was just rocket fuel. It resonated so deeply with people who already felt disconnected, and it ballooned from there, far beyond Birmingham.
Let's talk about the tactics then, because the goal, as we said, is this feeling of omnipresence. It's not about big, expensive campaigns, is it? It's about cheap, visible, public spaces.
Correct. It's a masterclass in guerrilla visibility, really. They use things that are readily available to everyone. Lampposts, street furniture. You just need a cheap flag and a handful of plastic zip ties.
And in an hour, you can transform the entire visual character of a street.
You absolutely can. But it didn't just stop at tying flags to things. They got more creative.
This is where it gets a bit strange, right?
It does. They started painting flags directly onto public infrastructure. The main targets were mini roundabouts and pedestrian crossings.
By there.
Maximum visibility for minimum effort. Think about it. They're central points of traffic. Everyone sees them every day. All you need is a couple of tins of paint and a bit of time, probably at night.
Which is how this very specific, very odd new phrase emerged. Going roundabouting.
Yeah. I mean, that phrase alone tells us so much about how quickly a political act can be absorbed into, everyday life and language.
So what does it actually mean? What are people doing when they go roundabouting?
It's literally people, sometimes with their partners or even their kids, going out on a weekend to paint the St. George's Cross on these roundabouts.
So they've turned a political statement into a community hobby.
A pseudo-leisure activity. It's sort of like a bizarre, politicized version of guerrilla gardening. And that's a really clever and I think quite dangerous sociological development.
How so?
Because it normalizes the act. When you start treating it like a family day out, it starts being an extreme political statement and it just becomes what we do around here. It domesticates it.
And there were immediate social consequences to this, right? Yeah. Even in schools.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources documented the emergence of this new, very specific playground slur. Your dad looks like he goes roundabouting. Yeah. It just shows you how quickly this stuff infiltrates and divides every level of society. It creates these little cultural markers of who's in and who's out, even among children.
And that kind of grassroots energy, as divisive as it is, it makes it very difficult for mainstream politicians to oppose, doesn't it?
It becomes politically toxic. The campaign very quickly found backing from all sorts of political corners. You had members of the Conservative Party, Reform UK, of course.
Lee Anderson was a vocal supporter, wasn't he?
He was probably the most notable. He said that any council officials who supported removing the flags should be fired for, and this is a direct quote, betraying the very country they serve.
That is incredibly strong language to use for a council worker who's just trying to, fix a streetlight.
It's extreme, but what's really instructive is that it wasn't just on the right. Even some Labour Party figures felt they had to lend support or at least not oppose it. It just shows you how completely the patriotic narrative was captured.
It became politically dangerous to be seen as anti-flag.
Exactly. You were forced to align with the symbol, even if you were deeply uncomfortable with the movement behind it. And that's how you win the ground war. You force your opponents to defend the symbol, not critique your intentions.
Okay, so let's dig into those intentions. You mentioned this dual motivation. On one hand, simple, harmless pride. But on the other, a much more strategic, aggressive occupation. What's the evidence for that second motivation?
Well, it really comes down to the density and the permanence of it. For many people, yes, it is just simple affection, a bit of local tradition, maybe for the football, nobody's denying that. But the analysis from groups critiquing the movement points to a very distinct second driver. This one comes from organized groups who see the flag as a tool for cultural dominance, a political boundary marker.
So it's the sheer scale of it that changes the meaning. One flag is pride. 100 flags is an imposition.
That's it, exactly. The goal, as sociologists looking at this have identified, is to visually claim space. The relentless, overwhelming presence of the flag is designed to make any kind of dissent feel unpatriotic.
Or to make any kind of difference feel foreign.
Precisely. For Black and brown communities, our sources suggest the message is a subtle but aggressive assertion of who owns the neighborhood, and by extension, who doesn't. It creates a very narrow, very restrictive definition of what it means to be British.
And we have some really powerful anecdotal evidence of the psychological impact of this. Let's talk about the story of Sarah, the teacher in Leeds.
Her story is just heartbreakingly clear. She's a second-generation British teacher, grew up in Leeds, has a broad Yorkshire accent, considers herself completely and utterly British.
Right.
But one day, her street, which had always just been a normal street, suddenly had these massive St. George's crosses on 3 houses in a row. And for her, the whole atmosphere just shifted instantly.
How does she describe it?
She said walking past them no longer felt like passing a celebration. She said it felt like walking past a checkpoint.
A checkpoint. Wow, that word is so loaded. It implies you're being scrutinized, that your right to be there is being questioned.
It's a feeling of instant alienation. On the street she'd lived on her whole life. She said the silent message felt clear and hostile. We own this space, and you are here on a guest pass.
That is the very definition of soft control, isn't it? No one has to say a word. The flag does all the intimidating work for them?
It performs the intimidation, and that transforms the symbol from a simple expression of pride into an active tool of psychological coercion. It's about asserting hierarchy right there on the public pavement.
And this isn't an isolated feeling. We see a similar thing in the story from that Kent coastal town.
We do. A resident there described a massive visual occupation by a local nationalist group. Flags, stickers, just everywhere. And right after that, a planned multicultural street food festival was postponed indefinitely.
A festival that had been running for years.
For 5 years, successfully. But the resident explained that the visual environment had just become too hostile. Vendors and attendees from diverse backgrounds just didn't feel safe or comfortable participating anymore.
So the flags didn't technically ban the festival. They just created an atmosphere where it couldn't happen.
Exactly. The symbolic action does the heavy lifting of policing the community's culture, as the source put it. The flags effectively chilled cultural expression. They set the limits of what was acceptable in that town without a single law being passed.
It sounds less like patriotism and more like marking territory.
Which is why some commentators draw a very direct and very serious comparison
To Northern Ireland.
to the sectarianism in Northern Ireland, where different groups have historically used flags, painted curbstones, and murals to mark out their territory and assert dominance.
That's a heavy comparison to make.
It is, but it's used to underscore the point that this isn't just about celebration. This is a strategy for marking and asserting territorial control. It's about creating visible psychological walls between neighbors.
So we have to talk about the specific groups who are driving this. Anti-racist organizations have been very clear about the links to known far-right activists, even if the movement tries to look like it's just ordinary people.
Yes, groups like Hope Not Hate have done extensive work on this. They've pointed to known far-right figures being involved in the organization right from the start.
People with links to groups like the EDL.
Individuals with alleged links to the English Defense League, yes, and also Britain First. And it's not just alleged links. Senior far-right figures, people like Tommy Robinson and the political party Britain First, have openly promoted and supported the campaign.
So there's direct, documented support.
Yes. There are reports of the supposed founder of the movement thanking Britain First for donating flags. So there's financial and logistical support coming from these established far-right groups.
And yet the supporters on the ground, the people putting up the flags, they always vehemently deny any connection to the far right, don't they?
That's the crucial contradiction. And it's a very deliberate tactic. The public-facing message is always about pure patriotism, about welcoming anyone from any background,
So they can mobilize sympathy from the general public.
while benefiting from the organization and resources of the far right. It's an attempt to insulate the movement, to give it plausible deniability.
But the actions and the private communications of some of the key members just completely undermine that claim.
They absolutely do. We've seen one of the main organizing groups, the so-called Wheelie Warriors, sharing photos from a Tommy Robinson rally. They've shared posts from openly xenophobic far-right politicians from Europe.
And it goes beyond just sharing posts, doesn't it?
Right.
There's evidence of members engaging in vigilantism.
That's right. Some members have been documented traveling to northern France and Paris, apparently to engage in anti-migrant surveillance or harassment.
So they're taking their ideology abroad.
It seems so. And some of the rhetoric from the organizers is just chilling. The example from Scotland where the movement spread as the Saltire campaign is particularly stark.
What happened there?
An organizer was found to have made racist posts, including one calling for refugees to be gassed all. And when he was confronted about it by a journalist, his defense was to argue that while Hitler went nuts at the end, he had good intentions for his country at the start.
There's no ambiguity there.
None at all. It shows that for some of the key people involved, this isn't about some fuzzy feeling of patriotism. It's explicitly tied to a violent, ethno-nationalist, white supremacist ideology.
And this spills over into real-world intimidation and vandalism against anyone who pushes back.
It does. There's been significant vandalism associated with the campaign. Flags painted on war memorials, on local signs, even on zebra crossings. But the intimidation of opponents is the core tactic.
What did that look like?
Local businesses that have tried to remove flags from their own property have been targeted. Vandalism with flour and eggs. In one case, a small business got hundreds of negative Google reviews overnight after the owner's opposition was shared by a campaign member online.
So it creates a climate of fear.
A climate of what's been called serious organized harassment and intimidation. It's designed to make opposition too costly, too frightening for the average person or business owner.
So we've laid out this highly organized, strategic effort to define the visual landscape, to use a national symbol to assert a very narrow cultural identity. How do we start to understand this in a sort of broader sociological way?
That's the next critical step. We need to move beyond the specific stories and apply the concepts that explain how this visual takeover actually works to cement social and political power.
Right, we need the framework to understand what's really at stake here for society as a whole.
Exactly. And that's where we need to talk about ideas like cultural hegemony.
Okay, so when we're looking at this huge strategic visual occupation, we need the right words to talk about it. Let's bring in this core concept, cultural hegemony, and specifically the work of the intellectual giant Stuart Hall.
Stuart Hall is absolutely essential here. He took the ideas of the Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci and applied them brilliantly to critique British society, media, and racism.
So what is hegemony in simple terms?
Gramsci argued that power isn't just about force. It's not just police and armies. Real, lasting power is maintained when the dominant ideas of the ruling class become the accepted common sense of the time.
So it's about winning consent, making your worldview seem natural and inevitable.
Exactly. And that's what Hall saw happening in culture. So this visual occupation, all those flags, it's not just a protest. It's an attempt to manufacture that consent, an attempt to make one specific exclusionary idea of Britishness feel like the natural common sense default.
An ideological takeover of the high street.
That's a perfect way to put it. Hall would say they're trying to define the accepted cultural parameters, and the way they do it is through what we can call soft control. By dominating the visual field, they're trying to set the default operating system for the community.
What do you mean by the default setting?
It means they narrow what's seen as normal or acceptable. If everywhere you look, you see only one aggressively displayed version of national pride, one tied to a very specific traditionalist idea of Englishness, then that becomes the standard.
And anything else starts to feel like a deviation.
Right. Any other cultural expression, any other identity starts to feel like a challenge to the status quo. It's not normal, it's other. And that's how power works in the cultural sphere, very subtly.
And the story of the pub landlord is a perfect real-world example of this hegemonic pressure in action.
It's a textbook case. This landlord had run a totally neutral, friendly pub for decades. He'd fly the flag for the World Cup, for national celebrations. It was temporary, it was unifying.
And then the local group associated with this movement got involved.
They pressured him to keep these huge flags up all year round. They wanted to turn his neutral pub into a permanently politicized space, a fortress for their ideology.
And the pressure was subtle, wasn't it? They didn't threaten him directly?
No, that's the key. When he hesitated, they just accused him of not being proud enough. He was implicitly positioned as disloyal, as not one of us. That's the power of hegemonic assertion. The moment you break from the new common sense, you're an outsider.
So he complied. And the pub's whole atmosphere changed.
It did, and the effect was that other people started to self-exclude.
What do you mean?
He noticed that his younger, more progressive customers, the international students from the local university, they just stopped coming. The visual occupation performed the act of exclusionary nationalism for him.
The flags acted as a bouncer.
A cultural bouncer. They policed the boundaries of that space far more effectively than any sign on the door could. It just proves that these symbols are not neutral decorations. They are powerful tools that actively define and police who belongs and who doesn't.
So the real danger here, if this soft control works, is that entire communities could become visually monolithic, pushing out diversity slowly, one pub, one lamppost at a time.
That's the long-term stake, yes. And that's why it's so important to understand how the public is actually reading these signals.
Which brings us to the polling data, because we need to know if people are seeing pride or if they're seeing fear.
And this is where we get a really stark, quantifiable picture of the movement's actual impact.
And it's important to note, the pollsters were very specific. They didn't just ask, do you like the England flag? They asked people what they thought the lamppost flag raisings were meant to convey.
That context is everything. And the data shows this deep, deep divide. It confirms all the unease that we've heard from minority communities. Essentially, both white and ethnic minority adults tend to see this as being primarily about an anti-migrant or anti-ethnic minority message.
So they're not buying the "we're just proud" line.
Overwhelmingly, they are not. The public is reading the intent, not just the symbol.
What are the actual numbers?
Well, among ethnic minority adults, a clear majority, 55%, saw the St. George's Cross raising as being driven by anti-migrant sentiment. Only about 15% saw it as simple national pride.
So for the people who are the implicit targets of this, the message is being received loud and clear as one of hostility.
It absolutely is, and it's gotten to the point where the flag itself is seen as toxic by a huge number of people.
The symbol has been contaminated?
I think that's the right word. The polling asked if people see the England flag, the St. George's Cross, as a racist symbol. 52% of ethnic minority adults, so over half, said yes.
Over half. That's staggering.
And it's not just minority communities. A really significant number of white adults, 36%, also said they see it as a racist symbol.
That's a huge indictment. It means this strategic co-option has fundamentally broken the symbol for a huge portion of the entire population.
It really speaks to the success of the weaponization we talked about. It has damaged the flag's ability to be a unifying, neutral symbol of belonging. But, and this is a critical nuance in the data, people draw a distinction between Englishness and Britishness.
Right. The Union flag is viewed very differently. What does that tell us?
It tells us a lot. And it aligns perfectly with what academics have been saying for years. Britishness is generally seen as a broader, more inclusive civic identity. It's tied to institutions, the NHS, parliament, democracy, and shared values across the nations.
Whereas Englishness is perceived as more exclusive.
More historically exclusive, yes. More ethnocentric. So when people see the Union Jack, they're more likely to think of a multicultural UK. But when they see the St. George's Cross, the association for many is now with a more narrow, white, traditionalist, or even far-right nationalism.
And the numbers back that up.
They do. When asked about the Union flag, only 26% of ethnic minorities thought it was a racist symbol. Compare that to 52% for the St. George's Cross. It carries a much heavier burden of exclusion, which has made it easier for ethno-nationalists to claim as their own.
So this isn't just about feelings or perceptions. This has real, tangible costs. Let's talk about the impact on public services.
The financial cost is significant, especially for councils whose budgets are already stretched to breaking point. We have data from just 36 local authorities, and they reported spending over £61,770 on removing flags and repainting roads.
And that's from just a fraction of the councils in the country. The real total must be much, much higher.
Unquestionably. And you have to think about the opportunity cost of that money. North Somerset Council, for example, spent £6,000. They pointed out that's enough to fill 200 potholes.
So residents are literally getting a worse service because council money is being diverted to clean up political vandalism?
That's exactly it. And the financial cost is one thing. The human cost, the impact on public sector workers is even more alarming.
The people who actually have to go out and take these flags down.
Yes. The level of hostility they've faced is just extraordinary. We're talking verbal abuse, death threats, and in some cases, actual physical assault.
For doing their job.
For doing their job. In York, council staff had to start wearing masks to protect their identities. In Hertfordshire, they needed police protection just to remove flags and stickers from lampposts.
Which proves this isn't just random individuals. It's being enforced by organized groups who are willing to use threats and violence.
Yes. And this climate of fear extends beyond council workers. It's affecting essential frontline staff.
You mean NHS staff?
NHS staff, yes. Trust leaders have reported that their staff, especially people who have to make home visits to vulnerable patients, feel deeply intimidated by the atmosphere these flags create.
How so?
One anonymous NHS leader said the feeling among their workers was that the flags were up, creating no-go zones.
No-go zones. That's terrifying. When a national symbol makes a healthcare worker feel unsafe entering a neighborhood, we're in a very serious place.
It's a profound social breakdown. It means a visual occupation driven by politics can effectively make parts of our country hostile territory, not just for minority residents, but for the essential workers who serve everyone. The stakes could not be higher.
So given how effectively the St. George's Cross has been co-opted and the damage it's doing, there's obviously a need for a counter-narrative, a way to reclaim these symbols.
Because symbols are always contested. Their meaning is never fixed. It's a constant negotiation, and we are seeing very conscious attempts to fight back on that symbolic territory.
from both political and cultural figures. Let's start in the political arena with Keir Starmer and what's been called Labour's patriotic turn.
Starmer's approach has been very deliberate. It's a calculated strategy to redefine Labour's position on national identity and to directly compete in this space that has been dominated by the right.
He seems to have decided you can't win by abandoning the flag.
Yeah.
You have to win by claiming it.
Exactly. He's not shying away from it. He's taking the fight directly to them, claiming Labour is the true party of English patriotism. That phrase is so strategic because it's aimed squarely at the people who feel their English identity has been ignored.
And his whole strategy seems to hinge on drawing this very sharp line between patriotism and nationalism.
He's been incredibly disciplined on that. In public discourse, those words are often used as if they're the same thing. He's trying to pull them apart.
How does he define them?
He frames nationalism as inherently divisive. He says it's about atomizing our society, focusing on difference, pitting people against each other. And then he explicitly labels the Conservatives and the SNP as nationalists who whip up fear of the other.
And patriotism, for him, is the opposite.
Patriotism is the unifying force,
Yeah.
an attempt to unite people of different backgrounds. It's a really clever reframing, and it allows him to redefine what belonging means.
So it's not about where you're from, it's about what you do.
That's the fundamental shift. He moves away from identity markers like race or heritage, and he reframes belonging around action and contribution. He talks about a Britain that judges people on how they contribute to the greater good.
A purely civic definition of belonging.
It is. If your actions show a commitment to the country, you belong. Full stop. And that's why he's so direct about the St. George's Cross.
He refuses to let progressives be scared of it.
He says he has no time for those who flinch at displaying our flag. He's asserting that the flag belongs to everyone who loves the country and wants to make it better. He's trying to rebrand a symbol that, as we've seen, has become toxic for so many.
So that's the political reclaim.
Yeah.
But the cultural reclaim is happening in a much more visible and maybe more powerful way on the football pitch.
I think you're right. The England men's football team under Gareth Southgate has become this incredible unifying symbol of a modern, inclusive Englishness.
Southgate seems very aware of that role.
He's acutely aware of it. He said himself that England has been a bit lost as to what our modern identity is, and he sees his team as representing that modern identity. And you can see why. They're diverse, they're successful, they're visibly proud.
And he's used his position to directly challenge the kind of racism and exclusion that fuels the flag occupation movement. His Dear England letter was almost a manifesto.
It really was. He wrote it in response to the racist abuse his players received. And it's this powerful piece of cultural negotiation. He talks about balancing tradition with progress. He says our desire to protect our values shouldn't come at the expense of introspection and progress.
So you can love the past, but you can't be a prisoner of its prejudices.
That's the message. And he directly dismantles that nasty, false narrative that's aimed at multicultural players. The idea that they're somehow less proud to play for England because they have multiple identities.
He celebrates that complexity.
He does. He says the players are humble, proud, and liberated in being their true selves. It's this powerful statement that identity isn't a zero-sum game. You can be Black and British and English all at the same time, and that directly challenges the monolithic definition of Englishness being pushed by these other groups.
And he understands the team's role extends beyond the pitch, this idea of banal nationalism.
He's almost weaponizing banal nationalism for good. He knows the team is a role model. He said he hopes parents and teachers will point to his team and say, that's the way to represent your country. That's what England is about.
He's consciously trying to change the default setting of what Englishness looks like.
From exclusionary tradition to inclusive aspirational contribution. It's a huge cultural project.
And from sport to music, we see another powerful example of this cultural reclamation with Stormzy. But he uses a different symbol.
He does. He uses the Union Jack. And his platform, grime music, is this incredibly potent voice for local, often marginalized communities. His Glastonbury headline slot was just a masterclass in this.
The stab vest with the Union Jack on it, an unforgettable image.
Designed by Banksy, it was so political. On one hand, he's proudly wearing the Union Jack, asserting his British identity. But at the same time, the stab vest and the blood-toned color of the flag are this searing critique of political failures on knife crime and racial injustice.
And his choice of the Union Jack over the St. George's Cross is so significant. It links back to the polling data we talked about.
It absolutely does. It reinforces that trend of Black British individuals identifying more with the broader civic British identity. The Union Jack is seen as less ethnocentric, less co-opted than the St. George's Cross. It's how Black Britishness navigates this identity crisis.
And like Southgate, he used his platform to talk about progress and solidarity.
Yes, that ballet sequence, highlighting that ballet shoes have only just started being made to match Black skin tones. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about cultural progress.
And he shared the stage?
He shared his platform to amplify other British rap artists. He was making the point that progress is a collective project. He said, we have come a very long way, but we still got a long way to go, which is exactly that civic, contribution-based idea of patriotism that Starmer is talking about.
So to bring this all together, we've really explored this deep tension playing out in our public spaces. This aggressive push for a very narrow definition of Englishness from movements like Operation Raise the Colors.
A movement that is strategically using the St. George's Cross as a perimeter fence, a do not enter sign. And we've seen the real-world consequences of that. Intimidation, abuse, and real costs to our communities and public services.
But it's not a settled narrative. The very fact that these symbols are being fought over shows their power. Political leaders like Starmer, cultural figures like Southgate and Stormzy, they are all actively trying to rebrand these flags as symbols of inclusion and shared values.
It really shows that national identity is always in flux. It's always negotiable. And that struggle over who gets to define modern England and who belongs in it is happening right now visually on every lamppost and roundabout in the country.
So the central challenge remains. How does society address the genuine feelings of decline and disconnection that these nationalist groups are so good at exploiting?
Without letting it turn into the scapegoating of migrants and minorities. And hopefully, by understanding how these symbols are weaponized, how they're tied to power, you get the critical toolkit you need. The tools to analyze the intentions behind the visual landscape of belonging that you see around you every single day.